The SAT strike turned into a brutal affair where many non-striking workers were murdered, beaten, and burned. Clashes between the police and violent strikers became commonplace. By the time the strike ended, over 30 million rand, which was a lot of money in those days, worth of damage had been done to SAT's property, with striking workers losing over 40 million in wages. The ANC praised the strike action and said, "There is no doubt that for us, the move forward, we have to include an element of violence in our actions." You see a pattern here. In 1988, marked more victories for the ANC. They had gained a lot of ground in the international scene with diplomatic offices in 25 countries. This provided the ANC with considerable support from the international community. Their propaganda failed to mention the organized and murderous kinds of violence that its supporters had been involved in. So the international community unknowingly pumped large amounts of fuel onto the fires of the already raging civil war. At this point, cheap shots were taken by the media at the police. They were accused of escorting Inkatha into battle against the ANC. I had that many times where they accused me of that. Such statements served to fuel more aggression against the riot units and to intensify the attacks on police patrols. In 1988 marked the commencement of the Operation Vula, which was planned to be a large armed offensive against the security forces within the South African borders. The operation's administrative backbone was a sophisticated computer system used to send messages between military leaders both within and outside the country. Certain ANC leaders spent time in the Soviet Union and Cuba taking part in an intensive training program which was meant to further the armed struggle. Large amounts of weapons entered the country via Mozambique and made their way to the Cataris area where they were stockpiled and distributed to key areas around South Africa. It was clear that the ANC was about to launch a massive armed offensive. Their covert war of planting bombs in predominantly white nightclubs, military offices, and churches was coming to head, and the bombings intensified. A whole new era of violence was beckoning. In January 1989, P.W. Botha suffered a stroke, and the National Party had to replace him quickly. F.W. de Klerk stepped in and immediately began making changes and getting the wheels in motion for a democratic election. He was widely denounced by white extremist groups as being a sellout. Despite this, de Klerk pressed forward with his ideals for a reformed country. He began negotiations with both Nelson Mandela and Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party. The Inkatha at least at that point. This worried the Soviets as they wanted communist control of South Africa under the new government. Their fears were that once there was a democratic government in place, Western capitalist ideals would become the order of the day. It was in their interest to provoke more violence and keep the alliance between the South African Communist Party and the ANC strong. Early 1990 marked the unbanning of the ANC, the South African Communist Party, and the Umkhonto we Sizwe. President de Klerk made this move to give the alliance no reason to fight on. Nelson Mandela was released in February of the same year, and the situation was expected to calm down. Instead, the ANC alliance stepped up their campaign, and huge marches took place around the reef, which was set up to discredit the black local council system. Attacks on councillors and the police increased. The attacks on councillors and police increased, and they were given orders to mount we were given orders to mount machine guns on their armored troop carriers and to enter the townships only in bulletproof vehicles. Policemen were being killed in numbers, and tensions were mounting between police on the ground and the residents, or the combatants is a better word there. There was, however, very little press coverage of the killing of councillors and policemen. Widespread intimidation of Inkatha members was being reported across the reef. This intimidation was also largely unreported as the Inkatha Township residents feared for their lives. House after house belonging to Inkatha residents was being attacked and burned to the ground, with its inhabitants being murdered and assaulted. Brutally murdered and assaulted. Again, a tit-for-tat township war broke out between the ANC and the Inkatha residents. Eventually, as the end of 1990 drew closer, it became impossible for Inkatha residents to survive in the residential parts of the township on the reef, and they fled the area back to Natal, where they originated from. However, the massive migrant worker population in the hostels in the townships were populated with hundreds of thousands of male Inkatha members. This was a recipe. Sure. They were organized and aggressive and very angry and out for revenge. The hostels were fast becoming Inkatha strongholds. On a cold winter's night in July 1990 on the East Rand into Khoza, and a large angry group of residents from the notorious Pola Park, which was an ANC stronghold, attacked the hostels and totally destroyed them to the ground. Like, there wasn't even a brick left. I was there. There was a large number of casualties, and within a few days, the hostel had been leveled to the ground. On 11 September 1990, a train was attacked by a small number of Inkatha gunmen. They ripped through their carriages, spraying the occupants with their AK-47s. This is talking about the author. The author was the first on the scene and caught up with the train at Germiston railway station. I remember this situation very well. He managed to put an end to the attack by tossing 3-tier smoke grenades onto the train. He was later accused by the ANC of assisting in the attack, and his actions were investigated. The rumor spread quickly, and police assistance of the Inkatha spread through the townships. In 1991, fighting continued with both sides as guilty as the other, but with the ANC gaining way more sympathy from the media and international players than the Inkatha did. This was predominantly due to the ANC's aggressive anti-Inkatha propaganda, which was driven by the Soviet Union. The reef was again struck the worst, and the police were stretched to their absolute maximum in an effort to keep the warring factions apart. Riot police were understaffed and under-equipped, and the media continued with its telling of one-sided story of township clashes, with consistent insinuations of police involvement in the violence. As the months rolled on, silly and blatantly transparent lies were thrown at the ANC by the government and vice versa. It had now become a fight for power between Inkatha and ANC. By then, it was inevitable there was going to be a black government in place. The question was, which one? The ANC had clearly gained more support through their propaganda campaigns, but Inkatha had the strongest following amongst the Zulus. Both sides wanted power and were prepared to do anything for it. The twisted, untrue, and half-true reports about the ongoing violence were peppering the media and were clearly slanted to promote the ANC. Violent massacres were occurring around Soweto, the West Rand, and the East Rand. Judge Goldstone headed an independent commission charged with getting to the bottom of the non-stop violence that was ravaging the black townships. The ANC continued their accusations that the police were fueling the violence and were responsible for the deaths. Judge Goldstone and his commission released a report saying the primary cause of the violence was the political battle between the supporters of the ANC and the IFP, the Inkatha, not the police. No matter the cause, the riot policemen on the ground, it was hell on earth. They were given the task of curbing the violence, which entailed putting their bodies in the line of fire loading many hundreds of corpses for the morgues, and placing their own families' lives on the sacrificial altar of duty. They were the only barrier between peace and all-out civil war. They were shot at, spat at, blamed, maimed, killed, divorced, and driven crazy by being exposed to the horror reality of non-stop violence. The truth has never been told before about those times and the effect it had on the policemen on the ground, who were only doing their best while struggling to maintain law and order. Even the horrors of this book have been toned down in order to make the truth more publicly acceptable. But it is still an important truth, no matter the way it is looked at, because it is an important but untold part of South Africa's history. All right, so that's that for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. That's not even chapter 1 yet. So chapter 1 will cover me starting in the college, pitching up there, getting into my platoon, and going through my training, and then eventually getting posted out. You're going to enjoy this. The book starts to ramp up as the chapters go on. So let me know in the comments what you think, and if you were there, maybe you can give a little anecdote in the comments. Doesn't matter which side you are on, whether you're on the township combatant side or whether you're on the police side. Let me know. We're not going to get into any arguments or fights on this. So we're just going to keep it civil, and we're going to talk about that period. All right, cool. I hope you enjoyed the first real video on Tales from the Battlefield.